So we're going to do something slightly different this coming presentation. We're going to create information to build upon important things that we should share. First, we're going to go over each portion of the subsection of humanity that exists within God's law and universe. And then we'll begin to extend itself into not just the information for biblical reference, but also from an ethical standpoint. Bioethics, of course, again, is my expertise, but also from the perspective of humanity. I've got about 27 years of experience with either fifth graders, families. I also have experience with high school. Outside of the 27 years, I have personal experiences that go well beyond most people's understanding. And statistically speaking, I could go into journals and other things and do the research and create all this information. The difficulty comes into play when there's misinformation, which is one of the reasons why bioethics exists. So many scientists have decided they're going to create or develop or lean into something that they've put together, and often it's misleading because it's forced information. So I need to begin by discussing what it is to clarify. So when I suggest that I want to clarify, what I'm basically saying is I want you to understand everything. You see, the universe, by God's law, was designed using patterns which are recreated over and over again to build building blocks. Those specific laws that are created by God are unattainable in change. You cannot change these laws. They exist, and therefore they are anchored. That's how we have truth. And if we, as long as we stay within those truths, the building blocks that we seek out of our answers are anchored, and then the constructs that include abstract love, passion, desires, and so forth, including any kind of science development or any kind of even concrete things such as carbon and such like that, have certain laws that are created that cannot be changed. So when we extrapolate the importance of those laws and how they affect not just the things that we're talking about that are, abstract, not necessarily tangible, but also in how scientists proceed and what they do, how they find truths, even the answers they perceive. We always assume in our faith that people are going to follow that faith, but we fail to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that people outside of our faith must also follow the constructs of God's universal law. And if they don't, then what we perceive and what we receive is often entangled with falsehoods, lies, and things that are not necessarily a truth. So I want to get past that. When we receive information from God, one of the things that we do on both sides of the fence, one is we accept what God has to offer, but we find ourselves coming up short because we decide that we're not capable of learning what we need to learn about God and what he has to offer. Also, this extends itself to mankind and how they create new and desirable things. And we seem to want to go, well, that's new, that's great. We accept whatever that is. And you cannot blindly disavow or agree to those things that are new and upcoming because they are multiplying in their expedience to create new things. The term is simple, exponential. 3 times 3 is 9, but 3 times 3 is 9 times 3, which is 27. Those are exponential numbers and often hard to follow. We want to make sure that we understand that in that changing times that we don't lose our perspective with relationship to God, which has happened in history over and over again. We also want to know that in the capacity that we are limited to and our mental capabilities, often greatly there is a separation between ourselves and those who have the knowledge. And just because they have knowledge doesn't mean we can't dive into learning more about that. Often that's my job when somebody asks me about something that's brand new in technology or the medical field or some kind of environmental change that's being made by humanity in their constructs of, well, buildings and other things. It's my job to go experience that information. What I mean by that is read about it, divulge as much information that'll give it a truth, because often magazines are written with partial information. Recently found out in the science presentation of the new dam that's being built in China, whereby the headline was, "This dam will be built with all robots and it's going to be 3D printed." And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. The 3D printing turned out to be the model. Every one of the models for the subsection of an already existing dam. The robotics that is being engaged is a group of machinery that's handling the dirt and other supplies that are going from one location to the other. And yes, some of the more dangerous jobs that were experienced back when Hoover Dam was built, there are issues that are being avoided through the robotics. But because that information was brought about by saying this is a brand new concept idea with robots and 3D printing, a lot of people would believe that that's the whole story. And in fact, it was a misrepresentation and also gave rise to funding and other things to that area because it was brought about that way, which is sometimes what scientists do when they're creating answers. They take shortcuts. As we begin to understand things and suggest that we have to pursue higher knowledge to gain that understanding, that is the truth that we have to gain in order for us to do a reflection in perspective of any new technology. The last time I met with my group, we spoke about the new embryo that was created without sperm. That is a very wrong thing to happen. The comment was left to lesser words than the impact that that might have. And then, of course, the comment made by a lot of people who are indifferent about this is, oh, well, they've got embryos right now, and they're working on having uteruses that are not attached to people and all this other stuff, as if it were common knowledge and therefore acceptable, and therefore there was no moral injustice occurring, when in fact there's a lot of bad things that are coming out that are intended to be good in their outward presentations, but often they are guised in a misrepresentation in order for the position, the power, and the involvement of science to do what it wants to do instead of what it should do. We need to make sure that we are seeking out what is necessary from God, and that we don't reach out to the things that we, in our desires, are driven by clarity. We sometimes want things that are not necessary, and often it can debilitate us from the ability of the things that are really necessary. And where does this fit in bioethics? It is a part of bioethics. One of the reasons why scientists circumvent things is because of their desire to have the new and bright, shiny toy that they want to play with at the expense of speed, and do so without reflective time frame that's required for anything. And therefore, they seek answers through alternate methods, including, as a matter of fact, artificial intelligence, which by design is supposed to be more accurate, but lacks the ability to extrapolate whether that information is truly not going to have repercussions. Because of the numbers involved, of the ability for artificial intelligence to accelerate, we cannot grasp at what they are accomplishing. So we don't know what's real or what's not, and their failure, which eventually will come because they were created by human beings, and ultimately that means there will be anomalies. So we're lost into a world that is saying we should, instead of saying, yes, we could. Let's first look at this. And then we have to look at how much, when we pursue something, do we reach into something that we are pursuing. This is the other side. In truth, do we gain a position where we become obsessive? Are we locking ourselves into things not paying attention to the peripheral. What is the reasoning behind that we are reaching for? Um, I would say to you, if we are reaching for something that is not going to help us, then the point would be moot. I can give you an aircraft, but if you don't have the money to maintain it, it's very expensive, it costs money, and you have to learn how to fly it. And even in that, we can see there's issues. I've got a friend of mine who got a pilot's license and all the work and labor he put into it. And I was figuring he's probably going to fly a lot more than he does, and found out he stopped flying altogether. I'm thinking, wow, you got that pilot's license. What are you doing with it? Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes, and I do drive this point home, the experience in that process was the intent, but was it of a selfish nature, and did it consume that individual away from their family? And yes, it did, and that's why it came to my attention from this individual, as his wife was seeking some kind of peace between what he was doing, what he wanted to do, and what his wife would prefer that he did do. And his back comment was, well, you have a PhD, but you're not using it. And again, did it help her become a better person? Did it reach a goal that it was benevolent? Or did they in turn choose those things because the other was choosing something outrageous? And this was their way of balancing it out, which was not the outcome of the whole process. I won't get into the specifics, but I'm sure you understand. You see, the path of God is what we should desire for us in our accomplishments, and the work should be wrapped in the pleasantries of the task, not necessarily the drive to complete the task. That's where I was going next. Some of the things we do when we're being challenged in our work, our day-to-day life stuff, and whatever else, we seem to say, oh man, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do, so forth and so on. What we need to recognize in order for us to change the way we do things in our life, because God expects us to work and gain knowledge and advance in our humanity, either by sharing with other people, which is essential that we work towards helping others, or even in our own lives, how we reflect off of that. But we must do it not blindly, not without some truth behind it, but we must be able to comprehend what we could do if we worked at it. For the same reason, when I'm providing information about bioethics and people will say to me, well, that's over my head, whatever I'm talking about. And I said, no, it's what you choose to be over your head, not necessarily what is truly above your pay grade. And working towards that goal, it should be a pleasant experience, even if there's challenging moments in the process. I find that I'm very successful when I use prayer for any of my moments, to the point where I'm actually praying as I go. When I'm doing artwork or sculpture or anything like that, I'm actually expressing myself in my mind as a prayer. When I'm being challenged to dig a ditch or work physically, I'll sing or I'll pray a little bit as I'm going, or focus in on God when the task is repetitive and sometimes muscle bound in order for it to operate. When I'm slinging 80-pound bags of concrete on my back to move to go pour a construction thing that I wanted to do. In that work, the drive to find answers is often misconstrued because we complicate things in order for us either to avoid it, or we intend to belittle ourselves, and we forget that those answers that we're trying to reach, including in bioethics, are often easily obtained through simplistic narratives. God speaks to us in the biblical references we go to. God speaks to us from the past and those things that he's provided to his good people. And God speaks to us even today in the things that we do, but often we make it so complicated and convoluted because we're not placing God first, we're putting ourselves in the middle of it. We fail to realize that God gave us everything we need to meet that obligation and whatever we do, and therefore we need to remember that. even in the complicated world of somebody who's passing on or dying, we often make it bad. We say, "Oh my gosh, that I'm going to miss that person. I'm going to look at this as a downtrodden thing. I'm not going to look at this as the next level." Me, if I'm dying, if I'm going to the next world, which is heaven, I hope, I desire it. I believe that's where I'm going to go. I'm hoping that, I have no question. I say hope, but I'm saying I have no doubt that heaven's available. Now, did I meet all the criteria? I don't know. But in my mind, I'm already there. I'm already there. But we limit ourselves, and we make things difficult, and we forget that God speaks in simplistic words. When He does this, we miss what's we often miss what we're supposed to be hearing because we complicate things. Even in people who become prophetic in how they reveal things, inspired wisdom, even healing of the mind, the body, and the spirit are often lost to generations because what is given to those people becomes twisted by their own desire to rise through whatever it is that's being provided in pride. And it can show its form in different ways. But ultimately, when someone says, "Look what I did, look what I figured out, look what is going on," it's not that it's unhumanistic, but it is that we need to try to fall back and lean it to God and give God the betterment of what's going on. Therefore, we remove that pride, that self, "Hey, I know what I'm doing" kind of thing, and it just comes to some other fruition. When God sent people to other places, He sent them to not only move to a better place where they're supposed to find peace within their own lives, but often when He put His own people into other places, He did so to spread what was available, that happiness could come to these people, that they could find a better way. Sometimes, I say that sarcastically, what happens is in compromising, we often find ourselves willing to compromise so that we can have peace, but we forget we cannot, in our error, deny what God's truth is at all levels. We do that now. We allow things in science to hit the street running, and we say, "That is fantastic. That'll answer a lot of questions. That'll do this. That'll do that. We accept, we accept, we accept." Never once really screening what's going on. When I pointed out the problems with gaming school board, my rebuttal was, well, we have grant money that pays for students who are able to learn how to program games. So their answer to my question was not an answer, but instead it was a statement that said, we're not going to change, despite the fact that we're seeing students who are out of school too many days, students who can't concentrate, students that lack the ability to learn, and the list goes on. Now, when we speak to these issues that we see that are a problem, such as these people who moved to these wonderful cities who were supposed to be the answer that God gave them, and then they messed it up, we also need to do so using the truth only. We don't need to get mad. We don't need to carry our pride. We don't need to remain anywheres but in the truth. And this answer was given to us in some of the words about Christ in the Philippians 2:6 through 11. It says, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Being a servant does not mean slavery. Being a servant means that you serve the need of what it is that you so greatly desire, which most of us believe is the love of God. Anytime we serve anything else, then we are serving that and making that, which is what we reach for, God. I once had a very well-spoken professor, and I still speak with him, Father Chaffee. He said, we all have somebody we bow to or something. It's just that we get to choose God. And if we choose God, then we don't have to worry about what other things come with other idols. So now that I've established what we are doing in the coming formation that we have within our group, also on my presentations, I want us to understand that we are going to provide building blocks for our future presentations. Information which is tentative because time is moving faster in the sense of advanced knowledge, and the changes are coming more and more. After each presentation, I'll need feedback if it's possible. I have availability of feedback on my website, and this will help me to answer questions that you're struggling with from the information I provided, and then maybe it becomes something that is asked enough by many people and then becomes the reason for me to change what I'm presenting in the way of answers in between each presentation. So I'm going to open up the door with natural family planning, and everybody go, why are you telling me about this with on top of bioethics, faith, all this other stuff? Simply put, the anchor of the universe is the relationship we have with God in a family setting. We are the children of God. Therefore, we could have no greater desire, if we so wish to reach for God's love, except for us to reflect on what it is that's meant by natural family planning. It is not meant just for married couples who are about to have a child and are determining those factors. It is not meant just for couples of all ages. It is not meant just for members of that immediate family. It's meant for everybody and under the guise of everything. Once I explain all the facets of natural family planning, from the full circle of a child at an age of 2 all the way around to a grandparent and back again to the birth of a child, then you'll begin to understand how these things we do within these families under the premise of a natural process remedied by God, that those processes engage us into an interpersonal relationship that grows from within the family outward, and that was the intent in the first place. Joseph, Mary, Jesus, God the Father, and so forth and so on. These are family representations, and they carry a great weight into how the world becomes what it becomes. Even if we find, like a lot of the people that I speak to in bioethics, about the difficulties of things that they want to change, we should have a rally, we should do that. No, rallies are great, support's good, but keeping in mind that we are to speak up, but that doesn't mean that what we say will intently become more prevalent because we gathered 10 million people in the street screaming, no, no, we won't go. Those things are not always the way that things work. More so are we addressing individuals one-on-one, and therefore growing the faith through those individuals, because we are more anchored in our faith, and therefore those individuals carry that forward, seeing that you have a better life, and in turn growing that faith based on what is truth, not my own preferences. So let's talk about bioethics in its relationship to other things. It's imperative and related to one simple and important word: respect. Family planning is wrapped into the word respect for each other that are married to one another and the children that they should have. So therefore, in respect, we respect God because we truly want to love him and share his love. And we respect each other because they are also children of God. And again, I spoke about this earlier. You can compromise in your conversations. You can be gentle in talking to them, but you cannot give up your moral perpetuity. You cannot give up what God's already said. This is this, that's that, because it's a law. When you break those laws, there are consequences. I don't care what scientists tell you. I don't care what anybody says to you. Every time somebody comes to me and says, well, look what they did here, then I take what's there and I look back, and if it's clear that this individual process has been properly addressed, then yeah, there's success. Anytime there's a shortcut provided, anytime statistics have been fudged, anytime things are not truly what they are, every single time there's failure. Guaranteed. Even in the providing of that, whatever that answer is, often will fail because people take shortcuts in providing what the answer is. Then I wish to say to you, okay, so let's talk about what I'm providing for you at this moment. I'm going to start out by talking about um, the natural family planning, and I wish to bring about the level of a 2-year-old. And I'm going to speak to you about what happens with a 2-year-old. And I'm not speaking off the top of my head, and you can go after me and quote some kind of psychological evaluation, some psychologist, whatever. I will tell you from personal experience, plus what I have worked on for over 30 some years in one form or another, even as a person within my family. I was exposed to many things that we won't get into, it's too much, that I had experienced that most people don't get. So we'll begin with a child of 2 years old, and then in this we reflect on not just the psychological elements in the pursuance of the biblical reflection, and we also want to address the parental responsibilities via God working on our way to the end of life. So let's begin. I'm going to also point out in this process platitudes as we go through this in both the directions, this way and this way, not just vertical. So, how that platitude at that time is reflective in the world of science, in biblical references, so we have a good understanding as to why that family unit affects all the things around it. At the age of 2 years old, the child is not limited as perceived by many parents, but instead that child is like a sponge. Often, if those children are exposed to more than one language, they become successful if it's done appropriately. A child of this age gains the ability to perceive its world by how the interaction is occurring between the child's moving through life and the parents that are in charge of their life, and how they create methods for that 2-year-old to overcome challenges. As its communication skills are starting to become more viable, which is extremely important at this point, it needs to be considered at the same time that that 2-year-old is completely aware of what's taking place and how they can obtain success through the purity of the response from the parents that are working with that child. Parents will perceive their place in this relationship based on what they believe is best for their child's welfare, while not truly reflecting, at least not all the time, off of the most essential of actions, which is consistency. It is imperative that parents are consistent in what they do. And that consistency should be anchored within biblical references, not some psychological babble. The success of that child in their growth at the age of 2 is rendered in a more than just ensuring that that child is being met with the basic needs. The basic needs are the things we already know: food, burping, feeding, pooping, breathing, all those things, water. But it also is the emotional end of the things that are most important to add to that addendum of naturally taking care of your child. As the parents are still leery, often they are overly sensitive to things that otherwise should be looked at in clarity. And they misunderstand what the child's needs are and the ability to reflect more faithfully than the parents who are pursuing the needs of that child should be doing. While at the same time, that child is dealing with multiple issues, which is part of that reflection, and it affects the interaction between the parents and that child that come within the age limit and arises up as they move on in their lives. Up until about 5 years old is where I'm going to sit. The key word here is, ready? No. They learn that and understand that the changes in their lives are affected by what other people say, especially their parents. And they hear a lot of that word no in different ways that says, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. And they do what they do as they present themselves with their experiences, and that child reaches a point where they say no. It is their presumption that's felt by the parents that they must allow that child to deal with their issues on their own sometimes. Walking away from the issue at hand, which is it's okay to say no, but understand what the child is saying is more than just the word no. What that child is actually saying is, I have the ability to say no. I have the autonomy of the word no, just as you told me. That affects my life. If we don't recognize the need to be aligned with those thoughts, then we change the way we function. Now, a simple example would be, are you willing to walk away from your child crying and leave that child to its own efforts if everything that that child need has been met? The poop, the burping, the feeding, all the things have been met, but the child is crying for attention. If that attention isn't impeded by a physical health issues beyond what's there, then that child needs that time alone to overcome that moment. Why? Because you're going to come back. And you can't show them the change from not being there and being there if you don't actually apply this. And once you've done this, you're starting to build the word trust. Yeah, it's true. The child begins to trust you because the child's going to understand that they went away, but they are guaranteed that they will come back. That is the point of contention for a lot of parents. When they do learn the word no, that's when this should be looked at seriously as to how you deal with your child and how you actually use what's known as discipline. Discipline is not meant beating the child. Discipline is the ability to control yourself by learning from those who are in charge of who your life is at that moment, a 2-year-old, so that they can gain that control that gives them the comfort of who they are, as well as trust in the people they love. Now, the intent of a child with the word and what it really means to them is now a matter of control. So they have all this autonomy, and they will do things which makes it more prevalent when they start saying no for no reason. You offer them ice cream and they go, no, and you know better. You know that that no just meant they could say no, not that it was intended to refuse that delicious treat. So this will be our first step into the factors that God loves loves us, and his universal law begins to affect the total relationship of every single human being that exists, not just in the parental role, but also in taking care of the of the child. But it also is the basis for the human interaction with all other individuals as we grow. This understanding of freedom that this child makes, and the understanding that this is brought about is a tripping point, then we begin to look at the relationship we have with that child at a different level. Learning the factors that come into play at this point, sometimes the parents will be looking for issues that are not necessarily issues that they don't have control over. So, what do? Are they able to turn to their parents and trust what their parents told them? Are they going to seek out the wisdom of their parents? Or are they going to turn to a book from some psychologist who believes that they have the answer? And unfortunately, more often than not, psychology is wrapped around what is already there, and going over old material often means that that psychologist will make adjustments in what they believe is correct in order for them to be noted and related to a more prevalent position in the world of psychology. There we are with that science. And the misdirection that often occurs because there's a lack of understanding that you cannot just make subtle adjustments on children hoping that they'll work, when in fact you actually have to be there all the time with that child. The next portion of that representation, which is related to God and the family of God, is that that child is a part of both parents, not just one, both. And in order for that child to be successful, it is a personality that relates itself to the wife and the husband, not some test tube. It doesn't work properly. Even the studies on in vitro fertilization has found that the children of those experiments end up having difficulties dealing with life and including finding out who their real parents are, just as adopted children would. In order for them to demonstrate the unique qualities they have to do, they go outside of the parameters, that is the parents, and they are often willing to find other major references, and then they lean on that experience that supposedly this psychologist would have, not recognizing that the children that they worked with were often in a controlled environment outside of a true relationship, because there's no way for them to be involved directly with a married couple day by day and cover enough numbers to make the statistical references viable. And instead, they tell that parent, in most of the material I've covered for psychology, is that that child needs to have a sense of freedom to choose without any true restrictions, because that would stifle their ability to advance in knowledge and understanding of the world. Yet we understand differently. Um, Life experiences are important and they do need to be provided for, but there is also a need for a direction to go in. Just as any creature that lives on this planet, that creature looks to its parents to gain references, again, because of what we've just said. When we talk about this 2-year-old having the experience of autonomy, they also know that the families between the parents and the grandparents, what is the relationship between the parents and the grandparents, is a determining factor of the ability for them to trust the grandparents when they know from experience. If they don't trust those grandparents, then that wisdom is stifled. And often there's a unwillingness to hear truths, even if the grandparents are not exact, even if the grandparents can't give them all the answers. There are small tidbits within the words that are presented by by wisdom given to the grandparents from experience that would help them get past this and do better. Where does that rely with God? It relies with God because God tells us to respect our parents. God tells us to remain faithful to our parents, in the sense that we have to trust in what they understand and know. And again, we go back to, it's not going to be perfect, but I don't know of any book that you can read that even comes close to being perfect. As a matter of fact, again, if I were giving a reflective behavioral assessment in school, which is something I used to do, I used to be told I can only spend so much time. Well, I'd spend all my own time making sure that I had a full breadth and width of exposure and that child's misbehavior or abilities or misdirection to deal with issues. I know I said it was impossible to get a true reading, but under those conditions, it's not a parent asking these questions, it's the school. So the best I can do would be to show up over and over again till my objective was to be almost unseen and seamless in that interaction, implying I was there to work with the teacher, not to work with the student. Writing huge amounts of anecdotal records, disseminating what occurred, then going back over it and pulling out very specific things that happen, which is what a parent is supposed to do. Being there at the right moments. The kid throws a spoon down. You guys, parents, will reach over, pick it up right away. Why? You're telling that kid that they're in charge. They throw the spoon down, pick it up, but don't give it back to them. So you just have to sit there for a while. Let them live with that fact for a little bit. And then you say, would you like the spoon back? Yes. If they do it again, you're not getting the spoon back and we're done. You don't get it. That's just a simplistic example, and in each situation arises, accordingly you respond. If the parent is using good common sense, maybe I shouldn't use that word because that seems to be missing in today's society. Even if they read the books, they're going to see tethered pieces that has been stolen from other things that are already in existence, and they've been changed or adjusted slightly, which is happening in education, where it recycles the information and changes a few words and says, look what I invented. And in fact, all they've done is change the words a little bit, thinking they've created a new anomaly, when in fact it's the same old material in a new package. Sorry. Just like songs, there's only so many key notes that you play with. At one point, you run out of that option. So when something sounds like somebody else's stuff, maybe it's not. So after the parents have carefully evaluated the situation and they are in love with each other, because that's what God would expect of them, then things are very different than those individuals who are not wrapped into each other's lives, instead worrying about how they're going to get through their lives. If they are working with each other diligently, and that's where natural family planning comes in, which I'll get into in future presentations as to why the subtleties of a relationship begins well before most people understand, at a very tender age, then that relationship maintains itself. When things are not going smoothly with the 2-year-old, there's no blame amongst all the other things mounting up for one or the other not doing this or not doing that. When they agree with each other, which is absolutely required in discipline. You're not saying discipline just for the child. You're saying discipline for you too as a parent. Discipline that requires you to take time to understand what's going on. Conversations with the wife and the husband that are intensely designed around the situation. Looking at being consistent, so that that child knows when they do something wrong, there is consequence. When they don't do something wrong, they do well, there is a reward. And sometimes that's not a reward that says feed them. Sometimes it's intrinsic. They gain a greater sense of autonomy because they can trust what they do is appropriate, because that's what they're looking for. That's human, God-created nature, period. And in given situations, a child also has to learn that there are times when the parent will override that free will. You give a kid a shot and you try to explain, you need this, and that kid gets hurt. That kid looks at you and goes, what? If you have not created that love relationship that is indelible, that cannot be removed, and that both parents agree to this, and this situation occurs, it's going to be even harder for that child to trust you. And you have to learn how to trust your child. When they start doing things where you go ride the bike, and you have to say, and you have to do it on your own because you can't ride it for them. And as we move forward in that child's life and time passes, eventually the scenarios will arise if there is no effort on the part of the parents, and it becomes a problem for the child in more than one ways. If you haven't paid attention, there is a matter of health involved in all of this. Yes, I am talking about the child's health. You cannot give that child support and then assume that the support stops there. That support you give that child goes beyond the household. It goes to when they go to the daycare. It goes to when they go to school. It goes when they interact with other children. If the support's not there at all, then we start seeing that the children have health issues. Why? Because there's this anxiety. If the marriage is not what it should be, the anxiety is understood by the child. He doesn't have to. You could go in the other room and yell and scream and holler where he can't hear you. When you come back, your body language, your essence, the very relationship you have with your spouse is going to show, and that child's going to know it. When I spoke about health issues, I am talking about things such as fevers, stomach aches, sleepless nights. Can you imagine? You committed a serious confrontation with your wife or husband. The child's right in front of you. That night, they're trying to get past the issues in their own life. Now we'll go to a level that some of you may or may not know, that when you sleep, that is how you answer questions. That is one of the biological things that I've been studying for years. And in answering those questions, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, it's related to teaching. When you teach the students how to make sure that they're ready for the next day. And we'll get to that sometime in the future. When you're talking about those frustrations, they don't get enough sleep. In turn, they have nightmares, possibly keeping you up, making you more aggravated. In turn, they are staying up more because you're more aggravated. Then you get into things like sleepless nights mean tantrums, aggression, biting, temper tantrums. The health issues come due to the lack of opportunity for sleep. Then it becomes a matter of you going to doctors because their immune system's down and somebody was sick at school, and who's the first person to be sitting home with a cold or a fever or some kind of flu or something like that? Your child. Why? Because they're dealing with other issues. You take the child to the doctor because you're worried about stuff that's beyond your understanding. Then you go to the doctor is not aware of your family relations and what's going on at home between you and your spouse, and he diagnoses that child with answers that are not necessarily a real answer. That's a fact. These things happen. I can build on that, but I think you get the baser of the ideas. I think you begin to understand where I'm going. Now we're building my understanding for you to relate to where I'm going with what I'm building. The family is the core group. We have to look at the family. Once we look at the family, then we can look at the rest of society. When I spoke about the psychologist earlier, I spoke to you based on the fact I'm explaining that psychologist operates in the desire to change things, to show that they can make it better. And unfortunately, as I explained, sometimes it goes south. But at the same time, how is that doctor going to understand what it is they need to change when what's happening has nothing to do with what's perceived? Next, when we talk about medical, if a doctor is recognizing there's an increase in the problem of children being sick, but fails to recognize it's directly correlated to the interaction of parental units, funny, parents, then we fail to answer the question. And studies are given based on the responses of children, i.e., doctors ask questions, i.e., they put it in a folder, i.e., or a computer, and somebody takes that information. But it is only a partial picture. That's why it's important for us to not let our faith and our religious beliefs and understandings to be just established in church. It has to bring it to home. The calm should be there. The respect garnered necessarily to the spouse. The care, tenderness, and the evolution of listening, which occurs from dating on. And it is established with the two separate individuals from the family, which begins at a very tender age of 2, and so forth and so on. You have to recognize they are operating in God's structured law, and they operate established without equivocation. I'm just going to read what St. Vincent wrote, and this is some time ago. The understanding, knowledge, and wisdom of one and all of individuals as well as the whole church ought then to make great and vigorous progress with the passing of the ages and the centuries, but only along its own line of development, that is, with the same doctrine and the same meaning and the same import. And this is before understanding of all the other things I just mentioned. He's speaking to us and saying, look, anchor yourself in the church, in the moral constitution. In that moral constitution, you will find success. Let me read on. The religion of souls should allow the law of development of bodies. Those bodies develop and unfold their component parts with the passing of years. They always remain what they were. There is a great difference between the flower of a childhood and the maturity of age. But those who become old are the very same people who were once young. Though the condition and appearance of one and the same individual may change, it is one and the same nature, one that this has the same person, that one and the same person rather. So my um, explanation, my understanding is this: everything grows from a base. Everything becomes what it is, and in doing so, those laws apply no matter what. There's nothing in this world that cannot be brought back down to what it was in its original form, especially people. I spoke to you about how the cities that God brought these people to, his people to, often were a way to establish God more prevalently, but more often than not, human beings fail because they lack the tenacity to stick to their guns. It is the same with parents who are more willing to use the shortcuts and avoid the emotional stress because they're so busy being busy. They don't recognize that that child is going to be everything for them down the road. Everything for them, everything for the people that surround them, their social lives, their well being, their ability to help others. How many people have had children that go out and support others in great quantities because they brought them up properly? They gave them the anchor from which to build on, to be more than just people. You want peace in the world, you want answers to science, you want all those things. Live within God's parameters, and all those things will come to fruition. I want you to understand that I forgot one thing, and that is, oops, let me get this set up. I forgot to open with a prayer, so, dang, I know. Duh. I am human, so I'll take that as a step back and remind you that prayers are important. Reflection and time is important. Balancing out your time, making sure that you remove yourself from all the things around you. Living in the light of God, knowing that when you're working, you should be working and praying so that you love what you're doing. And it doesn't mean that it has to be something that is perfect for you based on your understanding, but instead it should always be something that you can look back and say, I respect what I did there. Even in something as simple as picking up a piece of trash that's on the road, that's not even yours. You're showing that you respect God because it's his planet. You're showing that you respect the people that live there. You're showing that you respect yourself because if you're walking down the street, you also live there. Everything we do in a microcosm becomes more of what it is in the world. And if you want those answers, all we got to do is work together and stick with this guy behind me. Lord, you come down upon us and bring your word of enlightenment and understanding. We appreciate all that you provide for us. We understand that if we listen closely, that you always give those answers we so desire. Thank you for those moments when you've enlightened us. Thank you for the ability to provide others with that enlightenment. And thank you for your time that you give to us eternally. In your name, Lord Jesus Christ, amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. God bless all of you. And I'm out.